Hello there, hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourses. Today we're looking at chapter 2 of the Discourses, chapter 2 of book 2 of the Discourses. And the focus is on, so you see the title over there, what people the Romans had to combat, and that they obstinately defended their freedom. So therefore this is the question, the peoples that the Romans had to deal with, their people, who they were, and to the degree that they defended their freedom. In other words, so let's go into it. This is going to be a long chapter because there's at least four paragraphs, so it's longer than some of the shorter chapters we've had. Nothing made it more laborious for the Romans to overcome the peoples nearby in parts of the distant provinces than the love that many people in those times had for freedom. In other words, their love of freedom made it different. In other words, nothing made it more laborious for Romans to overcome the freedom. They defended it so obstinately that they would never have been subjected if not by an excessive virtue. Now, Machiavelli here uses the word virtue. The virtue means their arm, strength of might, strength of power. Machiavelli has, in other words, he's not understanding this in kind of this moralistic question of their morals, their goodness, but rather their abilities. And we have to understand virtue in the ancient world was really more about abilities and doing things correct. It's correct doing. It's the Greek arete was understood as a kind of form of correct doing well, acting well, and as doing the specific action correctly and properly or beautifully in that sense. And thus, this is why we have to understand virtue here, not in terms of morality, but virtue in terms of capacity, the ability. And he's saying that it was difficult for the Romans. The Romans, the people loved their freedom, and because they loved their freedom, they fought hard. And the only thing that helped the Romans was that they had more power. In other words, their power, their virtue, their ability. That they had. In other words, they would never have been subjected if not an excessive virtue. For what danger they put themselves in to maintain or recover it, and what revenges they took against those who had seized it are known throughout many examples. The harms that people and cities receive through servitude are also known from reading history. So if you're reading in other words, you go read your histories. He's saying, go look at your history. Look at the way. In other words, the record of. Look at the examples of the peoples who would fight for their freedom, and that the harms people and cities receive through servitude. Right? And whereas in these times there is only one province that can be said to have free cities in it. Calibra. The toe, right? No, sorry. This is book 1. Presumably Germany. Discourses 155, book 1, chapter 55, and book 2, chapter 19, right? The Germans. There's only one province that can be said to have free cities in it. In ancient times, there were many very free people in all provinces. One sees in Italy, in those times of which we speak presently, from the mountains, the Alps, right, that now divide Tuscany from Lombardy, to the point of Italy. Pardon. I should have put hold on that for a second. Sorry about that. That's the flu. It's the allergy. The remaining of the flu and the allergy. And the Calabrini, the toe for note 3. Right? The toe of Italy. To the toe of Italy. Were all free people, such as the Tuscans and the Romans, the Samnites, and many other who inhabit the rest of Italy. Nor is it ever reported, reasoned, right? Again, literally it's reasoned. It's never reasoned, reported, or told, right? That there was any king there outside of those who reigned in Rome and Porsenna, king of Tuscany, right? That's king of Tuscany. Again, 5. This is Livy 2, chapter 9. Book 2, 9 through 11, right? That's right. How his line was extinguished, history does not tell. But one sees quite well that in those times, when the Romans took to the field at Villi, Tuscan was free and enjoyed its freedom so much and hated the name of a prince so much that when the Ventines made a king in Vinti for their defense and asked okay, sorry, I had a coughing fit, really bad one, so he says, I'll repeat this line. He says, history used to tell us a lot of things, right? In other words, they give the example of this king that reigned there, and that the Romans, when the Romans took the field at Vinti, Tuscany was free and enjoyed its freedom so much and hated the name of the prince. And that when the Ventis, having made a king in Vinti for their defense, and asked for the aid from the Tuscans against the Romans, they decided, after many consultations, not to give aid to the Venetians, so long as they lived under the king. For they judged it was not to be good to defend the fatherland of those who had already submitted to another, right? Again, this is Livy 5:1. It is easier thing to know whence arises among peoples this affection for free way of life. For it seems through experience that cities have never expanded either in dominion or in riches if they have not been in freedom. In other words, if they've been slavish, you don't expand. For though the cities have never expanded either in dominion or in riches if they had not been free. And truly, it is a marvelous thing to consider how much greatness Athens arrived at in the space of 100 years after it freed from the tyranny of the Pistasos, the Greek tyrants. Or again, Herodotus, book 5, line 78. Okay, so now he says, the example that it is an easy thing to know whence arises among peoples this affection for a free way of life, right? In other words, he's repeating this point here, that if it's only the cities that are, for it is seen through experience that cities have never expanded either in dominion or riches if they have not been freed in freedom. It is truly, it is a marvelous thing to consider how much that, he talks about the Athenians, or Athens, after they got rid of their tyrant. They became very powerful 100 years. But above all, it was a very marvelous thing to consider how much greatness Rome arrived after it was freed from its kings, right? Again, Livy account of this. The reason is easy to understand, for it is not particular good. For it is not the particular good, but the common good, which makes cities great. In other words, the particular good of an individual or political actor or king, but rather the common good, the good that is that they share together, that would make cities great. And without doubt, this common good is not observed if not in republics, since all that is for the purpose. Since all that is for the purpose is executed, and although it may turn out to harm this or that private individual, those for whom the aforesaid does good are so many that they can go ahead with it again, go with it against the disposition of the few that were crushed by it. In other words, the majority, the many are benefited. As long as the many are benefited, the greater part is benefited, the larger thing is benefited, they can deal with the many, the few who are not. The contrary happens when there is a prince, in which case that what suits him usually offends the city, and that what suits the city offends him. So therefore, this is a double problem, right? That what's good for the city, what pleases the city offends the prince, and what pleases the prince offends the city. And that's the common good, right? The common entity, the collective, the civic order. In this mode, as soon as tyranny arises after a free way of life, the least evil that results for those cities is not to go ahead further, nor to grow more in power or riches, but usually, or rather always, it happens that they go backwards instead of getting bigger and others. In other words, he says that it's under freedom. It's freedom that lets people to expand and grow, and that once they become a city or a political community has succumbed to a tyranny, or a rule of a king, a rule of a group that rules for the private interest, the rule of the few against the many, that no longer grows. They go backwards, he says. And if fate should make emerge there a vigorous tyrant, who by spirit and by virtue of arms expand his dominions, the result is of no utility to that republic, but is his own. In other words, it doesn't reflect the republic. There's a tyrant, a virtuous tyrant, who by his spirit, by his virtue of arms, expands the dominion. Right? It's not going to be benefiting the public good, the republic. It's going to benefit his own, for he cannot honor any of the citizens he tyrannizes over, who are able and good, since he does not wish to have them, wish to have suspicion of them. In other words, he can't, honor them. This would make them too powerful. He also can't make the cities he acquires submit or pay tribute to the city of which he is a tyrant. For making it powerful does not suit him. So he's not going to make the city powerful because they won't submit to him. In other words, he can't make them, those cities he makes them submit, he can't make them, can't give them things that give them more power, give them, in other words, he needs them to, and they're not going to, the people who are, submit or pay tribute to him, to which tyrant is he's not going to want to make it powerful. But it does not suit him to keep the state disunited, and to have each town and each province, in other words, have each town and each province acknowledge him. So he alone, and not his fatherland, profits from his acquisition. In other words, he's not going to allow the republic or the entity, he's going to make up something to him, loyal to him. So he alone, and not the fatherland, profits from the acquisition. Whoever wishes to confirm this opinion with infinite other reasons should read the treatise Xenophon makes on tyranny. Right? This is the hero of Tyrannicus, right? Particularly book 2, lines 12 through 17, book 4, 3 through 5, 1 through 3, and 9, right? Hero. It is not thus marvelous that the ancient peoples persecuted tyrant with so much hatred and loved the free way of life, and that the name of freedom was so much esteemed by them. Thus it happened that when Hieronomius, the grandson of Hero the Syracusan, was killed in Syracuse, the news of his death came to his army, which was not very far from Syracuse. It began to raise atonement and take up arms against his slayers. But when it heard that freedom was being cried out in Syracuse, being attracted by that name, it became entirely quiet, put down its anger against the tyrannicides, and took thought of how a free way of life could be ordered in that city. Right. This is again Livy 24, chapter 24, verses lines 7 through 21 through 22. Right. So he's saying that at first they were angry at the army was angry at the slayers, those who slayed him, right? Because they were at first angry, but then when they would talk, freedom was going to be being cried out at Syracuse, and they were attracted by that name. Therefore they put down their anger against those who killed the tyrant, and thought about how a free way of life could be ordered in that city. It is also not marvelous that people take extraordinary revenges against those who have seized their freedom. There have been very much examples of which I intend to refer to one that occurred in Korea. Right, this is in Korea, a city in Greece, in the time of the Peloponnesian Wars. Right, this is again Thucydides 3:70-85 in Book 4. 46. This is the mass revenge ply against those, right? What happened there, right? The one in Korea. Since that province was divided into two parties, of which one followed the Athenians, the other followed the Spartans, it rose from this in many cities that that were divided among themselves. That one party took friendship with Sparta and the other with Athens. When it occurred in the said city that the nobles prevailed and took freedom away from the people, the popular party regained their strength by means of the Athenians, laid hands on all the nobility and shut them up in a prison capable of holding them all. They drew them out of their 8 or 10 in turns under the pretense of sending them into exile in diverse places, and had them killed, with many examples of cruelty. When those who remained became aware of this, they decided to escape this ignominious death as much as was possible for them. Having armed themselves with whatever they could, they engaged in combat with those who wished to enter there and defend the entrance of the prison. So that in this noise the people made a crowd, uncovered the upper part of that palace, and suffocated them with the ruins. So destroyed the place and killed them. Many other similar horrible and notable cases also occurred in the said province. So that one sees it to be truly that freedom that is taken away from you is avenged with greater vehemence than that which it's wished to be taken away. In other words, the danger is that the kind of vehemence or desire to take freedom away is responded mostly by the people more violently. That I mean, I wonder about this, whether this has changed in the modern time. With the advent of Christianity and this, did this change? In other words, did this become different? Oh, that's another question. Thinking, paragraph 2, thinking then whence it can arise in those ancient times, people were more lovers of freedom than in these. Right? He says that, right? They were more lovers of freedom in ancient times than now. I believe it arises from the same cause that makes men less strong now, which I believe is different. The difference between our education and the ancient, founded on the difference between our religion and the ancient. Okay, so therefore it's education. In other words, the education between our education and the ancient education, resting the difference that why the ancients cared for more freedom than we moderns do. The times he's talking about this. And that is because he says, well, it's education, but education founded on the religion, the difference of our religion and theirs. For our religion, having shown the truth and the true way, right? 12, John 8, 32, John 14, 6, right? I'm the true way, makes us esteem less the honor of the world, whereas the Gentiles esteemed it very much, and having placed the highest good in it, were more ferocious in their actions. In other words, the good of this world. In other words, the Christian religion teaches us about the next world. In other words, that the real good is the way, the truth, the light, Christ, and His kingdom, that the kingdom He promises, not this. In other words, good in Him and the thing He promises, not this world, right? In other words, that teaches us to esteem less the honor of this world, whereas the Gentiles esteemed the honor this world very much, esteemed it very much, in having placed the highest good in it. As he says, and because of that, they are more ferocious. This can be inferred from many of their institutions, beginning from the magnificence of their sacrifice as against the humility of ours. In other words, the magnificence of their sacrifices. They would be very bloody sacrifices, where our sacrifices are kind of seem to be more humility rich. Where there is some pomp more delicate than magnificent, but no ferocious or vigorous action. So in other words, our sacrifices are kind of, there may be some pomp and that is more delicate than magnificent, but no furious or vigorous action. Neither pomp nor magnificence of the ceremony was lacking there, but the action of the sacrifice, full of blood and ferociousness, was added, with a multitude of animals being killed there. This sight, being terrible, rendered men similar to effect. Besides this, the ancient religion did not beatify men if they were not fully of worldly glory. In other words, the ancient religion did not beatify, make men great, make men holy, if they were not worldly glory. They are not full of worldly glory, as were the captains of armies and princes of republics. In other words, they tended to make holy and make great, to make saintly, or to render them, to beatify them, right? To make them the agent of the divine, right? Worldly men of like great captains and great people, right? Our religion has glorified the humble, the contemplative, more than active men. It has then placed the highest good in humility, abjectness, and contempt of things human, and placed it in the others placed it in the greatest of spirits, the strength of the body, and all of the things capable of making men very strong. So the modern religion, the Christianity, particularly he's talking about here, the modern religion, the highest good is what? Accepted. The humility, abjectness, to object, submission, strength, and contempt of the human things human. Whereas the ancient religion, greatness of spirit, strength of the body, and all the other things capable of men very strong. And if our religion asks that you have strength, in yourself, it wishes you to be more capable of suffering than doing something strong. In other words, the Christian, you have to suffer more. It's about suffering. It's about, it wants you to be strong, that you endure suffering, not do great things. This mode of life thus seems to have rendered the world weak and given it in prey to criminal men who can manage it securely, seeing that the collectivity of men, so as to go to paradise, think more of enduring their beatings than avenging them. In other words, Machiavelli, Machiavelli said that this world, this kind of religion, this modern Christianity, is a religion, and this is where someone like Nietzsche will say, "Oh, this is Christianity or Judaism is a religion of the slave, right? The slavish religion." Well, Machiavelli doesn't say it's slavish. He says it makes us weak, and thus our weakness becomes slavish. That why? Because we don't care for this world. We long for it, and therefore this gives this world over to criminal men who don't believe in these things, right? Criminal men who can manage it securely, seeing that the collectivity of men wanting to be holy, wanting to go to paradise, will endure their beatings. Being good and I'm being beaten, I'm being punished. This is good. I'm proving that I'm holy. This is why we hear many Christians and saying, oh no, we shouldn't resist, we shouldn't fight back, because if we have to fight back in bad ways, we can't do bad things, because if we have to do those bad things, we will become bad, and therefore we have to be holy, and therefore therefore it's better for us to lose. We keep our holiness and get beaten, because this will prove our worthiness, right? This is the kind of thing that Machiavelli is accusing it of, right? And although this world appears to be made effeminate and heaven disarmed, it arises without doubt more from the cowardice of the men who have interpreted our religion according to idleness and not according to virtue. So in other words, Machiavelli is very interesting. He's not unlike Nietzsche is saying that the religion is. Machiavelli is saying here, this is not about the religion, Christian religion. No. It's about the way it's been interpreted. So, in many ways, is Machiavelli kind of a proto-reformer? The reformers, like with the Christian Reformation. That, in other words, would Machiavelli look at a Luther and say, Luther is not preaching this slavism, but then he does. Luther could be seen as the great captain if Luther wanted to. If he thought politically, he could have been a great captain and made a great Germany, unified it. But instead of this, he abandoned it, and instead why? Because he thought it was political, and he was more concerned with the holiness. Okay, so in many ways, Luther would disappoint Machiavelli, but the other reformers, in this sense, that they talk about free cities, the Dutch, the things that the Calvinists in Geneva, the Swiss, and the places where it does happen, that they will protect. They will not interpret Christianity to be submissive. Okay, and this is, in other words, this is what Machiavelli says, that it's the cowardice of the. Okay, he's taking direct aim at the Catholics, the Roman Catholic Church, that there was something, and I would think he would even say that it was hope in someone like Savonarola, but he didn't exercise it correctly. He misstepped. In other words, they made effeminate and heaven disarmed. It arises, no doubt, of the cowardice of the men who have interpreted our religion according to idleness and not according to virtue. For if they considered how it permits us the exhortation and defense of the fatherland, they would see that it wishes us to love and honor it and prepare ourselves to be such that we can defend it. Okay? In other words, he says the Christian religion does not. Now, Machiavelli does not. Here he says that if it's of manly men, in other words, womanly, effeminate men, when they read the scriptures and they read these things, they corrupt this church. The womanly and effeminate types, that they make Christianity soft and servile, where what Machiavelli says, no, the scripture teaches us something different. This is, if it's going to make us stronger, it permits us to exaltation and defense of our country, our fatherland. They would see that it wishes us to love and honor it and prepare ourselves to be such that we can defend it. These educations and false interpretation thus bring it about. That is, in other words, it's this bad education and this false interpretations of Scripture bring about this current situation. That not many republics are seen in this world as were seen in antiquity. In other words, the political realm. And nor, as a consequence, is there much love of freedom as seen in peoples as was then. See, Machiavelli would say that this Romanesque religion, not the religion of Rome, but this Christianity defined by the Roman people of the captured slavish people, corrupted the servile thing. This is Machiavelli's critique. It's not Christianity servile, or the faith of the church is how it's interpreted. He's saying in their education that doing this. I still believe that the cause of this to be rather that of the Roman Empire. I still believe the cause of this to be rather the Roman Empire, with its arms and its greatness, eliminated all republics and all civic ways of life. The empire, in other words, the great empire, they destroyed all this. The empire, now, this is interesting that although he loves the republic, he's critical of the empire. In other words, the dominion. They destroyed everything. And although that empire was dissolved, the cities still have not been able to put themselves back together to reorder themselves for civic life, except in very few places in that empire. However that may be, in every least part of the world, the Romans found a conspiracy of republics, very armed and very obstinate in their defense of freedom. So therefore, the Romans found it in the world that they found. However that may be, that the Roman Empire, when they crushed everything. They destroyed the free republics. They destroyed the free way of life, and they destroyed the memory of it. And that may be Christianity, the imperial authorities by embracing Christianity, and the way they interpreted Christianity. Again, this sounds like Roger Williams' critique of the attempt of the empire to take. In other words, the empire's use of religion under Constantine and the empire, than per se the critique of the Constantinian and the Roman Catholic position of this, in that sense. Okay, this is in other words, he said that they were obstinate before. In other words, every other part they confronted them. Conspiracies of the Republic, very armed and obstinate defense of their freedom. This shows that without a rare and extreme virtue, the Roman people would never have been able to overcome them. In other words, he uses the argument that the peoples were so fight and fierce that it required this excessive virtue. To give an example of this in some part, I wish the example of the Samnites to be enough for me. So we're going to use the Samnites. It seems a wondrous thing that Titus Livy confesses it, that they were so powerful and their arms so sound that they could resist the Romans up to the time of the consul Papyrus, Cursa, the first son of Papyrus, who was a space of 46 years. Now, so therefore, this is Livy 10, 31, 38, and 42, right? After so many defeats, ruining of towns, and so many slaughters received in their country, especially when that country, where there were so many cities and so many men, is now seen to be almost uninhabited. So much order and so much force were there then that it was impossible to overcome were it not assaulted by Roman virtue. In other words, there was so many people, in other words, so much order and so much force was there. It was impossible to overcome was it not assaulted by Roman virtue. It is an easy thing to consider whence that order arose and whence this disorder proceeds. For it all comes from the free way of life then, and the servile way of life now. In other words, this is the difference. All this order and disorder comes from the way of life. The free way of life then versus the servile way of life now. For all towns and provinces that lived freely in every part, as was said above, made great profits. In this chapter, right? This is, yeah, in this chapter, right? Had made great profits. The free cities made it. For larger peoples are seen there, because marriages are freer and more desirable to men, since each one procreates these children he believes he can nourish. Right? In other words, that they grow and he can nourish them. They grow freer in that sense. There's more of this. Yeah, he does not fear that his patrimony will be taken away. He knows not only that they are born free and not slaves, but that they can, through their virtue, become princes. In other words, they can be great, they can achieve things. In other words, riches are seen not to multiply there in large numbers. Riches are seen there to multiply in large numbers, both those that come from agriculture and those that come from the arts. So therefore, it's in other words, agricultural sciences become. In other words, the republics and free people are going to grow more. They're going to think that okay, my children are going to grow, my children are going to be prosperous. I'm going to invest in my children. They view that there's a future, that they're going to benefit from the future. Therefore, they engage. They become richer, both in terms of the arts and as well as agriculture. Right? For each one he multiplies the things and seek to acquire these goods he believes that he can enjoy once acquired. In other words, if I can enjoy the goods I make, I will be more likely to engage them. I'm not going to be able to enjoy my work or my effort, and they're going to be taken away from me. I'm not going to. Then why should I work hard? In other words, if someone's going to take away what I earn, or I labor, or I make, and it looks like they're going to take it away, why bother working then? Okay, this is the point, that they will that if they're free, they are going to enjoy the rewards of their efforts, and therefore they will engage in more of it. Right? For each one he multiplies the things and seeks to acquire those goods he believes that he can enjoy once acquired, from which it arises that men in rivalry think of private and public advantage. So that therefore, in the rivalry, the people are when it rises that men are in rivalry, think of private and public advantage. The one and the other comes to grow marvelously. In other words, the contestation of them in their rivalry to get more, they will accomplish more. He's saying, in that sense, this is the republic in that sense, right? The contestation of the peoples trying to want more. They rival each other. They rival each other in terms of what their wants. They think of private and public advantages, right? And both the one and the other come to grow marvelously. That both the private advantage grows and the public advantage grows. 4. The contrary of all these things occur in countries that live servilely. And the more they decline from the accustomed good, the harder is their servitude. In other words, the more they decline from the accustomed good of the servility, the harder is their servility. And of all hard servitudes, that is the hardest that submit you to a republic. In other words, the hardest that submits you to a republic. In other words, the servitude that you're doing, this republic has made you servile. That's going to be more servile than otherwise, right? First, because it is more lasting, and there can be less hope to escape from. So a republic has made you servile. It's going to last. In other words, the prince will die, and okay, maybe be free from it. But a republic, well, it's going to last longer than any prince or tyrant. Second, because the end of the republic is to invigorate, and to weaken all other bodies so as to increase its own body. So therefore, the republic will do what? Seek to benefit itself, and to anything opposing it will be seen has to be destroyed or has to be overcome, right? To invigorate it and weaken all other bodies so as to increase its own body. A prince who makes you submit does not do this. If that prince is not some barbarian prince, a destroyer of countries or wasters of all the civilization of men, such are the Oriental princes. So let's repeat. Again, I'm sorry, this is interruptions. I've been coughing. This is my allergies. He said that the republic's going to be more servile, right? Conquered by a republic will be more servile. That he says that first they're going to last longer. Second, the republics will invigorate and weaken all other bodies. A prince who makes you submit to this does not do this. If that prince is not some barbarian prince, so he makes a very important thing about the difference between the type of prince. There's going to be and that this echoes what then Montesquieu will talk about this. Montesquieu talks between about a monarchy and despotism, and that this is the difference in that monarchical rule or a despotic rule. That therefore, following Machiavelli hints at this, that there's a distinction here. That it's not this prince. A prince is not if it's not a barbarian prince. This is a prince. A barbarian prince wants to destroy, take everything, destroy it, and leave nothing behind. Waster of all civilization of men. These are the Oriental princes, he says. But if he has within him some human ordinary order, he usually loves his suspects, cities, and leaves them with their arts and almost all their ancient orders. So a prince is going to leave them with their arts and their orders. So if they cannot grow like the free, still they're not ruined like the slaves. Understanding the servitude in which the cities come as serving a foreigner. For I've spoken above of that of a citizen of their own, right? Early this chapter, Discourses, and also in Discourses 1, chapter 28 through 30, right? So that, in other words, the servile, they're serving a foreigner as their own. If the prince is of their own, he's going to have some affection for them. But someone who's completely alien, whoever will thus consider all that was said will not marvel at the power the Semites had when they were free, and at the weakness into which they came when they were serving others. Right? There's the Semites example of this. They were serving. Titus Livy vouches, where in 16 this is gives faith, vouchers or give faith. For this in several places, especially in his War of Hannibal, in which he shows that when the Semites were crushed by a legion of men who were in Nola, they sent a spokesman to Hannibal to beg him, 17, beg, pray, they pray to him, right? Beg. They pray him, they pray to him, they beg in him, to succor them, to help them, to give them. They said in their speech that for 100 years they had combated the Romans with their own soldiers and their own captains, and many times they have stood up against 2 consular armies and 2 consuls, and that they had sunken so low that they could hardly defend themselves against one small Roman legion. That was in Nola, right? This is 18, this is Livy 23, 41 to 42. So he begged them, saying, we were once great, we were able to do this, but we have become so servile. We can't even fight. We used to be able to put armies against 2 consular armies led by consuls. We're now, today, we can't even defend ourselves against a single Roman legion. This is the begging to them that they don't have the virtue or means to defend themselves. So this ends the chapter about the virtue of the people of the Romans fought against, and the question of the virtue of the people, and the question of freedom, and why freedom is such a powerful force. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in there. I apologize for the coughing and things. I was getting hit, and I stopped a couple times to deal with it, and take some more allergy pills. So if you have any comments or questions about the text, please give it. If you have any concerns about or themes that you thought were interesting, please we'll highlight them and we'll respond to it. If you like it, hit the like button. Helps the algorithm. Hit the like button. Also share it. Share the video if you liked it. You share it. Share it to your friends. Share it to your colleagues. Share it to anyone you think is interested in this. Share it on your social media. Share it far and wide. And if you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. It gives you notifications only, but it helps the algorithm. Commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing all increases the algorithm, so that when people looking for themes like on Machiavelli or something, our video series will come to their attention. If you didn't like it, you can always thumbs down, but say why in the comments. This way people can learn. Next you can do is, if you want to follow me on social media, the social media links are below. If you want to know more about me as a researcher or a scholar, an academic, or you want to check out my academic work, you can check the academic social media links below the social media links. Also, if you want to help me to do what I do, and it would be good if someone did this, life is difficult and expensive these days, please consider helping through Subscribestar, Patreon. The links are below, or consider buying one of the books. My books list, the available books listed below. You can order it through your local bookstore or through either an online distributor like Amazon, Libris, Barnes & Noble, Book Depository, or any other, or by ordering it directly through the publisher. Well, that's it. We now turn to chapter 3 in the next time. I hope you have a good day. Take care, and bye-bye.